relative materiality of Fluxus, films, or perhaps one film, as you will see later, what I mean with this kind of plural version of the word film. Flux film and related artworks as they exist inside and outside the collections. As events, performances, and processes, the artworks I am going to present today accumulate time and memory and complicate the questions of what the work is and how it should be conceived of, and subsequently how it is presented and conserved. Picking up on the motifs underlying the 5th edition of the Seminar of Digital Arts, Projections and Memory of Art, and particularly on the topic of heritage, which I think relates to the notion of conservation, I am conceiving of conservation as a sort of memorization gesture, or a memorization of sorts, and a process which reveals itself as an intervention in the temporal dimensions of artworks. I will posit that thinking about time, or the kind of theories of duration in the case of those works, will allow us to better understand the reciprocal relations between their materials and meanings. I will first present you really with 3 encounters with one particular work, the Flux film number 1 by Namjoon Park, to expand on the notion of time and change and to explicate, as it were, the transitory nature of this particular work as it moves between analog and the digital, or analog and digital formats. I will then go into the issues of time and change and archive and present you with a proposition for a different kind of continuity of artworks. The second part of my talk will focus on an exhibition and 2 more works which kind of relate to this exhibition. While I decided also not to theorize really the notion of memory here, it will come through my talk quite frequently, but I am also happy to discuss this in the conversation afterwards. Yes, super, thank you. Perfect. So let me take you directly to the encounters. Number 1, and I would ask you to play the film now. In a slightly darkened gallery, I am standing in front of a wide screen that fills a rectangular wall with a proportionally cinematic rectangle. The image appears to blur towards the edges, its contours soft, its corners slightly curved. The film projector clatters relentlessly, transporting a film strip through its inner mechanism, pushing its plastic body tooth by tooth through perforations, a rather monotone, yet persistently present mechanical soundtrack. And you might have heard that the sound was not quite loud, but there is really, a sort of kind of inherent sound to this film, which is very, very important. The machine is located on a pedestal slightly below my eye level. I feel the warmth it produces. The shutter interrupts the emitted light during the time the film is advanced to the next frame, unnoticeable, but somewhat palpable. The projected image is almost clear and at first sight static. I keep my view engaged on the whiteness. The contemplation plays out gradually when I realize that the whiteness, rather than showing nothing, contains random information, dark traces of different kinds, appearing occasionally, smudges, particles, shadows. I am drawn to its physicality, the audio of its mechanical process of display, the sober intensity of non-illusory real-time, and the way in which it imposes contemplation and requires engaged spectatorship before it reveals itself. Number 2. and I will ask you to play this tiny film. A white cubic space right behind the passage from one part of an exhibition to another is illuminated by a perfectly bright rectangular image. I enter the room, I stand still, I wait. Nothing happens. The image projected in front of me is white, perfectly rectangular, showing rectangular sharply cut edges. It seems to just exist, unaffected by anything happening around it and anyone in the room, a white flag of pristine image. My eyes, hard from whiteness, slowly somewhere from behind, the unobtrusive humming presence of a digital projector becomes recognizable. As I turn away from the image towards the source of the light, I can see the projector located below the ceiling in the upper center of the wall. I can hear lively sounds from behind the walls, a world reserved for somewhere or something else, and I am haunted by an unfulfilled desire to hear and see more, which becomes an unbearable disruption. Number 3. I bent over to view a round film can in a vitrine at an exhibition. The can is slightly open, concealing a roll of a transparent film stock. For a while, I observe it, studying its dimensions and form, the stains of oxidations on the can's lid, and some traces of tape once applied. The film presented in a sealed museum vitrine is distant and deactivated. It is a potentiality rather than an actuality. Gazing at the object behind the glass, I attempt to project this film onto the apparatus of my imagination and guess what it contains. What would it reveal if I were able to view it? I am trying to imagine. Is the film still enclosed twofold in the can and in the museum vitrine, a sign of its valuable and exceptional status? I am able neither to view it nor to smell it. It is isolated from me and from the surrounding exhibition, still and static, an artifact or relic, one part of an unknown whole, a stagnant remnant of an unfulfilled spectacle. What I describe here are 3 encounters with the same work, with the many films of Zen for Film, created by the Korean-American artist Nam June-paik, sometime between 1962-64. Zen for Film is a prototypical Flux film, a found film and a ready-made, according to Fluxus George Machunas, originally a linear projection of a clear 16mm leader which was thrown onto a screen. Stripped to its barest essentials, the film stock itself, Zen for Film was an anti-film which, following John Cage's idea of non-sound music, revealed nothing other than its own material qualities and the noises of a film running endlessly through a projector. Having placed his filming opus magnum somewhere between the cultures of cinematic and visual arts, Paik put the screening of his film on display. In Zen for Film, pure electric light meets the flatness of the screen. The artwork manifests its material qualities in the processual collecting of traces of its own projection. Zen for Film has also a character of a cinematic event, which cannot be experienced 2 times in the same form. Paik's film rich iconographic and formal content, its associations with Marcel Duchamp and John Cage's modernism, with the Zen aesthetics of nothingness and silence, and concepts of boredom, indeterminacy, and chance, are significant for a fuller understanding of the world. Equally important are considerations of time, the time of the beholder and the participant, time of the machine and the time of the film, as it transforms itself from the state of transparency to the state perhaps of opacity through the imprint of time. This mechanical, indeterminate imprint not only memorizes the film's transformation, but also emphasizes the beauty of decay and transforms time's deadly effects into a remarkable encounter with the analog medium of film. In Pike's film, the imprint of time has a positive value that inverts the relationship between transparency, which enables seeing, and the loss of transparency, which imbues what is being seen, or what becomes less visible and more opaque, with another quality. And rather than in an instant, this new dimension of seeing reveals itself in time, in duration. Traditional analog film first freezes the reality in miniature snapshots, still film frames or photograms, and subsequently animates it through the continuous movement of these frames through the projector. An argument that I'm sure you are familiar with, which was put forward by Laura Mulvey in her book Death 24th times a second from 2006. But because there is no static frame in Zenfo film, no image as a photogram whatsoever, Pike's film also transcends the cinematic depth drive, the 24th times a second moments of frozen temporality, successful in circumventing the material condition of the filmic medium. It also eschews the illusion of movement which makes still image run, an equivalent of an understanding of time as succession of instances that was criticized by the French philosopher Henri Bergson in the assessment of cinematography on its early stage. But what primarily interests me in Zenfo film is this artwork's changeable nature, not only as a result of the film's physical transformation, the accumulation of trace in the process of projection, but rather the multiple transitions of Zenfo film that occurred during more than 50 years of its existence. In what follows, I will shift your attention from the formal and temporal aspects of the work to a focused study of Zenfo film's conceptual and material transition, a sort of a theoretically enhanced material study, which will be followed by a brief discussion of the notion of conservation, time, and changeability, as well as archive, and a proposal for an alternative understanding of continuity of artworks. So the three presented here encounters, you might remember them just here summarized on the slide. The three presented here encounters with Zenfo film could not be more different from one another. The first is a filmic projection executed from instruction. I have actually a pointer. Yes. The first is a filmic projection executed from instruction with the help of always new equipment and a new film leader. In fact, to exhibit this work, I will tell you a little bit more about this when I get to the exhibition part of this presentation. To exhibit this work, it requires just an acquisition of an instruction, either from the estate of Point or from one of the collections, such as, for instance, the MoMA or other collections. So what one basically presents in the exhibition is a filmic leader and a film projector that is always new. So the first one follows this kind of logic. The second one, this silent projection here, this digital kind of flux film transposed into the digital medium, is a digital projection played back from a digital file of Flux film anthology. This is really interesting also for this kind of thinking, how Fluxus films, became many different things and how they transitioned over time. Machunas basically created Flux film anthology a few years after Pike conceived of this manifestation of Flux film that you see on the first slide. And this flux film anthology consists of many, many different films, but Zen for Film opens this entire group of works. It also imposes, as you might imagine, very linear kind of projection in terms of one system for film as the first film, and then the film is followed by different other films. So this is more kind of linear and more directional, and very different, as you might already imagine, to this projection that I've shown you before. Yes, and the third one here that I mentioned, just a short summary, this is the Kant film reel, or a film remnant, an object relic from the 1960s. And here they claim to be the same work of art, Zen for Film, right? So this is quite interesting for any kind of material-oriented study. What is lacking in those encounters, and I just consciously didn't bring it up here, but I will mention it quickly now, is this Flux film edition, or Fluxus edition, which was created by George Machonas a few years later as well. In 1960, sometime between 1964 and 65, actually. So this open edition includes a transparent white box with, varying by version, one or multiple short strips of film leader. So we have the analog film projection, right, the digital film projection, and a film object, and a multiple edition in this universe of the first Fluxus film. So these form manifestations here pose really interesting questions. As a Fluxus edition, right, the last one, Zen for Film questions the artwork's unique status. As a projection executed from instruction, I remind you of the first one, right, the issue of singular curatorial interpretation and the material authenticity, so significant in traditional conservation, mandated with preserving the artwork's vehicular medium. And I'm meaning here, with vehicular medium, I mean the kind of structural medium that carries the work. It is different than artistic medium, and these terms are coming from analytical philosophy and people such David Davis, for instance. For instance, in dance, the artistic body and the sort of kind of physical career of articulate step would be the vehicular medium, and the entire sort of kind of expression of dance, articulated steps, but less connected, perhaps directly with the physicality of the medium that carries it, would be called artistic medium. So just to say that in this case, preserving the vehicular medium seems quite problematic, right? Because the film or the films, the Flux films, are many, many things. As Zen for Film moves between formats, it thus loses its media specificity and acquires new meanings. Following the traditional idiom of conservation, and according to the museum's zeal to preserve artworks, if you were to conserve the matter, right, of the film, its vehicular medium, the film leader, or even, the film projector for that matter, if we spoke about the first instance of the work, we would not be able to run it through the projector, or to run the film leader through the projector, which is why the film is kept in the film can as a relic. And it is really interesting because when I did my research at MoMA for this book, I will tell you more about later, MoMA actually regards the film relic, this one here, right, the Kant film leader from the 1960s, as an original work of art, and the only kind of unique Zen for Film that is kind of coming from the 1960s, carries the trace of the artist, and so on. MoMA also conserves this film in a cold storage. Plus also considers the digitization of this work. So the question is also here, and I find it really very how can I put it, challenging conceptually which kind of version, you know, or if the work is digitized in a way on a certain condition, or, you know, the level of the sort of kind of wear and tear that this work, so to say, manifests, will be frozen in, you know, in the future kind of digital version of the work. So this is very, very kind of conceptually challenging, because it's in a way producing a new work on the basis of something that was, you know, that perhaps presented sort of a process of acquisition of traces and so on in the past. So what is also really interesting about this work is that a few years later, after I basically finished writing on Zen for Film, on this one here, and I encountered a very similar relic, the relic in the Harald Zeman collection, which was acquired by the Getty Research Institute. I was a fellow there for a few months in 2017-18, and basically a friend of me told me, Hanna, well, you write about this work. Have you seen? We have, you know, another unique Zen for Film in our collection, so let's go see it. And my eyes were basically, you know, wide open when I saw that Harald Zeman, for one of the exhibitions of Pike and other artists, basically produced yet another relic that, you know, might raise the same kind of issues of authenticity as the MoMA relic from the Silverman collection. So we have, you know, Getty Research Institute relic and the relic from the Silverman collection. Yes. But if we come back to these issues that I mentioned earlier, if we decide that the strategy to keep, in a way, this physical film leader is adequate, would we derelict the film if we had to run it through the projector? On the other hand, would the conservation of all material aspects of this work not diminish its inherent vitality? Or does proper conservation of this work indeed signify keeping every film leader that contains traces? Theoretically, I could keep, you know, the version that we exhibited in New York, about which I will report just in a few minutes, as well, and present it as a relic of this exhibition. So if we were to preserve the initial film leader, remember again here the case of the relic, why not keep every subsequent one, right? Can we feed the ever-expanding archive of this work endlessly? And if we were to decide not to keep everything there, we run the risk of betraying the materialist ideology of conservation, the imperative of which is to preserve each physical element of an artwork. Is the presence of the relic not an evidence of the urge to keep physical objects, right? And last but not least, if nothing changes hands when the collectors or museums give permissions to display central film only only the instruction, in the case of this work here, right? Then where is the authentic object? And authenticity here, as you might well know, is one of the most significant paradigms of the Western museum and conservation culture, basically. So, what, or where, how, and what is Zen film? Zen film is one example of artworks created in the post-KJM era, which, with its roots in modernist music and instruction-based logic, laid path for the so-called dematerialization of art in the late 1960s, which resulted in the separation between the artwork's concept and material. This was, of course, very short-lived, as many of you know, because all art manifests itself in some kind of material and not purely conceptual. So Zen for Film illustrates that the theories of traditional conservation, but also the museological practice, or how they manifest in museological practice, are unsuitable to conceive of many recent works. In its traditional branch and function in service of museums as memory institutions, conservation seeks the physical stability of things in its desire to arrest change or even to return a work to a state from before, back to a past condition, let's say. The objects of traditional conservation were meant to be rendered static. Therefore, change was charged with negative qualities, concealed and by all means avoided or arrested. It is also interesting in this relation, to think about actually what kind of concept of time underpins this type of, preservation or conservation of objects. And I believe, and in my writing, I often relate to, or I often put forward a critique, a temporal critique of conservation in terms of thinking that the idioms of conservation, such as reversibility, restoration, or coming back to a former condition, actually put emphasis on a linear conception of time, right? So on the one hand, we think that there is, a condition of an artwork which is better than others, right? Any subsequent one. So there is usually a first or a second kind of state of an artwork. An artwork leaves the studio, it is being exhibited, and this is the original kind of condition or state of which we like to think in more sort of kind of better terms or in a more elaborate way than the other. Now, if you think about the concept of time that underpins this is a linear concept, right? So on the one hand, there's this kind of follow-up of different kind of temporal moments, and on the other, this is this sort of kind of paradox of an attempt to try to return to a condition from before. So, the same goes for the concept of restoration, for instance. Restore means actually to return to a past condition. Also, as I mentioned before, authenticity, aligns with the same sorts of kind of issues. And reversibility, especially used for more kind of traditional thinking and conservation, follows the same kind of linear conception of time, and at the same time tries to question it, to return to a condition from before. But there is also this issue of the stable or static object. The assumption of the stable or static object might be derived from the romantic idea of a unique work produced in the course of an intentional activity of an artist's genius, right? And here we are also coming back to these issues of originality and authenticity that rests in its fabric, sealed by the hand of the author. The Enlightenment's belief in the power of knowledge also contributed to this kind of conception of a static object or a work of art, which rests in one particular condition. And also the conviction that works of art can be known through the scientific investigation of the materials, scientific investigation as something that basically reveals the truth about the materials of a work. A work of art can be kind of dissected into its constitutive parts. And as I mentioned before, the concept of restoration, an attempt to return to the previous perfect intended condition of an object, is a paradox resulting from the combination of the concept of the static object and its recognizable states or conditions, the belief in the power of science, and the misconception, as I believe, of linear time. Nothing ever made, and I quote here, nothing ever made can be left untouched. Nothing ever damaged can be resurrected, said the American cultural geographer David Lowenthal. Conservation, like any other intervention, entails an interpretative gesture and thus change, or even produces new objects. Therefore, in relation to Fluxus film, number 1, Susan film, I use the term changeability, which refers to an artwork's potentiality to change, to transform from one condition to another, and from one appearance or constitution to a different one. Changeability occurs in time. Change is an index of time. Changeability may involve obvious physical change known from traditional media, such as degradation or decay of materials in painting and sculpture, and a fundamental change that finds evidence in historical practice, for instance, a recursion or transposition of a medium or the medium's further development. It is also a conservation of a dynamic work as a relic, for instance, or a leftover. This is the sort of kind of changeability that transgresses the limits, usually, of accepted change. There is a notion that many of you are familiar with that was put forward by the Guggenheim and the Variable Media Initiative, the term of variability, that quite often is referred to when we talk about those works. In my mind, variability is something, that refers to many different changes or kind of multifarious changes in a work of art, but these changes always kind of circulate around some kind of core, or a center of a work which rests unchanged. And with a work like this, as I presented to you, this type of notion, I think, is not sufficient, because the work does not vary and does not circulate around the same concept anymore. It's in a way becoming something else. And I will push it a little bit more forward or further as I go towards the end of my talk. So it can be said that a large number of iterant works, and with iterations, I mean works which manifest in different sorts of kind of variations, variants, and versions. So works like Zen for film, but also multimedia installations, performances, and events created especially since the 1960s. They invite change as a positive value. They inherit change as a fundamental constituent of their identity. But you might say, right, all is fine, changeability, what have you, these are just notions. But what are the limits of changeability, and how can we basically allow a work, to change, and who decides, when the work changes so much that it transgresses any of the limits? So I believe that the concept of the archive as a virtual and physical sort of kind of domain might be helpful here. Whereas the physical archive, in my thinking, harbors documents, remnants, and objects, all this sort of kind of static things. The virtual archive is a domain of tacit, sometimes even unarticulated knowledge. It is a domain of skill, of memory, but also of knowledge of the archive's functionality. Conservation's engagement with the archive, both as drawing from and with regards to the permissions of what enters it, establishes these limits as dependent on judgments related to a set of cultural, political, technical, and economic factors that prevail in a given time and context. One could say that the archive renders the limits dependent on the cultures of conservation, or curatorial culture for that matter, if you wish, establishing rules and setting perimeter on what can be said or made, both with reference to the present and to the past. In a Foucauldian sense, these cultures set conventions regarding the limits on what can be said or made. The conservation of this type of works, I argue, films, installations, conceptual works, and multimedia, is henceforth no longer a return to a past original state, right, or a preoccupation with a distant past, but rather an active and creative presencing of artworks. It is the creation of the archive that harbors the artwork's identity and guides its future iterations. Accordingly, I propose to discuss Zen for film, that's film number one, in terms of, in the context of its continuity, rather than conservation, a term perhaps that gains more validity in relation to changeable works in general. We may agree that the continuity of this work as an object, performance, process, and cinematic event is secured by its constant reenactments in various galleries on the occasion of different exhibition venues. Its itinerant character and logic based on the presence of instruction guarantees its survival. Contingent on the archive and the cultural determination, institutional politics, and the knowledge of those involved in reinstantiating the work in its more than 50 years of existence, Zenfo Film has led its multiple life as projection, relic, Fluxus multiple, and digital variant. So how can we imagine the life of this work in the current time? If you wish, in the post-digital age, the aftermath of simulacral, the second life, and so on, the time of augmented reality and 3D print technologies. I will not go into these issues, of course, in this short talk, but I will present you with a different, perhaps, form of continuity, or with an alternative, how we might think about the continuity of this work in a different way. In the future, the only artwork that will survive will have no gravity at all, maintained Pike in the 1980s. He speculated that once liberated from the gravity of its material, the art of the future would lack a physical, preservable aspect. Just a few years ago, in the same vein, the American artist Corey Archangel stated what would be left is only the source code. And the German media archaeologist Wolfgang Ernst contended on another occasion that code does not age. And it's perfect, really. It works very well. What you are watching here is Zen for Internet. A work created by the Swiss duo Com and Com in 2014 as a commission. Yeah, I don't mind. You know, we don't need to play the website. Sorry, let's just stick to the spinning wheel. Thank you. Yeah. So what you are watching, we have been watching right now, is the work created by the Swiss duo Com and Com in 2014 as a commission for the exhibition, which I curated at the Bern Graduate Center in New York, which featured Pike's Zenfo Film in various iterations, as filmic relic from the 1960s, Fluxus film, Fluxus edition, and a cinematic projection, among others. The exhibition, as the name suggests, and I'm gonna just, yes, so this is Zen for Internet. Yeah, little other insight into Zen. This is the slide about the exhibition. So the exhibition revised, as the title suggests, the standard assumptions about what a work is or might be, what we are presenting, preserving, or what enters the realm of cultural memory. By making into its focus the changeable quality of one singular work, the exhibition subverted the common narrativity of displays. I refrained from telling a story through an intended arrangement of objects. What was shown was the work and its world, not as finished, but as a processual, changing, and manifold, in a way, universe. Exhibition demonstrated that conservation, musealization, and preservation introduce just moments, poses in the eternal flux of this work, and things in general, things more in general, towards entropy. We can only slow down this flux, I believe, and not always quite successfully. You can see here a few slides just from the exhibition, and when I say, you know, we presented a work and its world, we were quite limited, you know, to several manifestations of this flux film #1. So you see, you know, the filmic projection here, the relic in a vitrine, and there was another vitrine which is missing here, the Fluxus edition, which was placed in the corner. But there was also this very kind of richly assembled digital interactive, which I will talk to a little bit later. What I was really interested in, you know, was to exemplify this kind of unfixity, the dynamism the work as process or work as performance, which might help to us to rethink not only the idea of conservation, but also to revisit the concept of the object itself, right? When you think about, the sort of kind of musealizable, right, or presentable object, we always refer to some kind of physicality and, again, to something static and fixed and contained. And perhaps to many of you who work in the digital domain, this is already, a total nonsense, right? Because the work is interactive, it changes, it creates itself as new inputs or contents are kind of injected. But actually, in traditional thinking about, museum collections or obviously about conservation, we tend to focus on an artwork as this kind of self-contained static object. So while looking at, flux film kind of manifold transition, perhaps we can also revisit the concept of this kind of fixed object itself, no? In an object which is more of a kind of perhaps slow event, right, or a performance over time, than something, stable, fixed, and static. You might know this, and I've heard from Pavel that many of you work on Fluxus and or have read a lot about Fluxus and wrote their papers on Fluxus collections. It's George Brecht, one of the most important, perhaps, Fluxus artists that created the idea of Fluxus events or events core as well. He posited that every object has an event-like quality, and in a way, every event has something object-like in itself. So these terms might appear to a certain degree pretty exchangeable or interchangeable. So the idea that works of art such as Mona Lisa or so are permanent might be actually replaced by the idea that it is an impermanent work, but it occurs to us as permanent just in this long duration. It kind of transgresses the limits of what we might think about stability or fixity. So I think that this type of works that basically showcase how transitory and changeable artworks or objects might be tell us something about the relation of permanence to impermanence, and this is again something that underpins the Western sort of kind of museological culture. And perhaps then we might think better about those works in terms of relative duration. So, a stable work such as Mona Lisa or a Michelangelo, with his statues, what have you, would be just as impermanent in long duration as impermanent those works are in short duration. So this is all about the sort of kind of relative durations of the impermanent. I hope this is translatable, and thank you so much again for your efforts. The relative durations of the impermanent, a notion actually that I learned from the British performance artist Stuart Brisley, and that I wrote about quite extensively as well. So looking this kind of conceptual realm and coming back to the exhibition included over 30 works, which can be viewed in a digital interactive kiosk. And I had actually a website to show you here, but also perhaps for the reason of time, we'll just leave it this way. If you are interested and would like to access it, I will have links just in a few slides. So this digital interactive kiosk was structured by the introduction of several conceptual frameworks, such as you see here, boredom, chance, materiality, nothingness, silence, time, and trace. If you clicked on those conceptual frameworks, only those works which were kind of described this way or which evoke these concepts were shown. Also, this entire interactive, this is what I was going to show you, on a live website, was designed by a really talented New York-based company that reflected the logics of Zen for film as well, so of Fluxus film itself. When you interacted with the work, and I don't know if this is quite visible here, you produced all these traces. Here, the RGB traces, right? You see here. Basically, you know, an interactive aspect of the digital kiosk that reflected Zen for film logic. You might remember that the film runs through projector requires traces. So these are the websites, basically, if you would like to check it out. So while some of those works, I will come back to this slide, perhaps, while some of those works were closely or loosely relating to the main work, Zen for film, as you know it already, a selection of artworks argued for a possibility of continuation or perpetuation of artworks outside the conventional frame of conservation that rests upon material continuity, right? This section included autonomous works that continue the concept rather than material of Zen for film, not entirely an appropriation and not quite an homage, although both have been realized after the creation of Zen for film. Amongst them were Zen for Internet, that you already experienced, the spinning wheel, and I will come back to this shortly, and Corey Archangel structural film, which I will quickly discuss now, just because it builds a wonderful bridge between the sort of kind of digitality that I evoked earlier and the analog. Now, if we had the website, we could see, and you can access it again through the interactive or on YouTube. It's also up there in a digital variant. This is structural film by Corey Archangel, which explores the ideas familiar from the genre of structural film, but which is transposed to the digital realm and which takes Pike's Zen for film as a primary inspiration. In order to create structural film, Archangel applied an aged film filter in Apple's iMovie to a blank image, and then exported the file into QuickTime Movie and had it transferred again to 16mm stock. Although he was initially interested in making a pastiche, as he said, a pastiche to structural film, a genre of experimental film, as you know, by blurring the boundaries between the real dust and a fake dust, film idea, as he described in an interview, an error occurred during the transfer, which resulted in the chance addition of colorful dots, which he accepted as artistic content. Next to the continuity of Pike's idea in the form of an autonomous artistic creation, it was also the removal of the pictorial content as a strategy for highlighting media materialities that structural film and Zen for Internet have in common. Archangel's film is actually interesting for another reason. He points to the impossibility of drawing a clear boundary between the notion of a work from digital and a digital medium simply used as a carrier to contain contents which are not specifically reflective of the work's digitality, of its own media condition. If we assume, perhaps, that some of the characteristics of non-digital works work this way. So, what is important here is that although the analog is usually contrasted by the digital and the analog are often not exclusive, but mutually contingent upon each other. In other words, in media works, the digital and the analog often coexist, whether on the level of the work itself or on the level of the documentation, which stands for the work in its absence, right, when the work disappears. The digital becomes a part of works that we regard as analog. And you might remember here again the example of Zen for film, which I bet many of you will criticize, the digital projection that I show you as the second encounter. So the digital becomes a part of works that we regard as analog, and on the other hand, the analog seems to persist in the digital content of what we come to designate born digital works, as in structural film, for instance. According to Christiane Pohl, which you know so well, and which also features a chapter in the book edited by Pablo, the employment of digital technologies as a medium implies that the work is produced, taught, and presented in a digital format. The analog, instead, is something relating to or using signals or information represented by the continuously variable physical quantity, such as spatial position or voltage, and something avoiding, perhaps, or something avoiding computer technology. But these definitions are quite, kind of vague, I believe. So let me come back to Zen for Internet, which is no more spinning here, but you remember how it was doing this. How this work came to be. Zen for Internet was conceived by Markus Gossold and Johannes Hediger, who formed the Swiss collective Com&Com, using the iconography of the Internet and a digital interface. The work features an endlessly rotating loading wheel on a white background. Typically, the loading wheel is a temporary in-between state, all this, on a white background, and it presents the kind of state before the image appears. Then for Internet, however, indefinitely freezes the in-betweenness. The final image never arrives. Then for Internet is not typically interactive, and yet it evokes a very unsettling sense of interactivity. We are suspended in a continuing expectation that the work will happen. We wait for a content which actually never arrives. There is actually an anecdote, which repeats this beautiful situation we had before when the artist sends a package of the works to a curator in Bern. The curator came back to them and said, the work is broken, just go and fix it. We just see this spinning wheel. And of course, they said, well, this is the work, so live with this or send it back to you. But yes, it's a very kind of interesting, I think, work. So the artist conceived of this work in a variety of media, and here is also quite an interesting spin to this story. It exists as a website on www.zen-net.org, and you can check it out. It also exists as a 30-minute, this is the website, a screenshot, basically, as a 30-minute video, right, of the work, of which actually also there exists a 5-minute version, and it repeats this kind of, infinitely changeable nature of Zen for Film and Flux Film #1 as well. It exists as a painting, and you saw it already, the painting here. It also exists as a various types of merchandise, including prints and T-shirts and so on. In addition to appropriating the themes of time and boredom from Pike's Zen for Film, Zen for Internet reflects the multiple existences of Pike's work. Zen for Film can authentically be realized in a variety of media rather than a single instantiation. A repercussion, I think, of the Fluxus Higgins theory of exemplarist nature of artworks. And here's the exemplarist manifesto from 1976, which many of you, of course, know, according to which the objects resulting from the realization of a concept are only examples. Higgins claims that the audience constructs by means of a notation and the work the intent of the artist. The work is an example of, rather than a structure or a realization of a work. So the example relates to the exemplarist. As already mentioned, the transpositions of Zen for Internet, which was initially conceived as websites to different vehicular media, the material examples of the work, recall the mediality of Zen for Film. And the mediality, I'm borrowing here this term from Urban Dictionary, which was used in reference to social media and the activity of individual creating user contents. So while in Zen for Film, the contents have been created in the course of over 50 years of the work's existence. In the case of Zen for Internet, they have been sanctioned by the artists from the very beginning. And yet the work is not, capped at this version. It will probably evolve as the medium is transposed continuously to different sorts of platforms and so on. And here is one of them. Zen for Film actually has been collected by an online museum. I really find the idea, of an online museum. I bet that many of you are familiar with online museums. We could have interesting discussions perhaps afterwards. The museum is called No Show Museum, which exhibits the work of a video file, Zen for Internet of a video file, that has been uploaded to YouTube. The concept of the museum, in which, in theory, nothing is shown, presents us with a conundrum. The work exists, right? It is presented to an audience, but it is bound to a certain appearance and materiality. It seems that the musealization, the act of adapting the work to the constraints of the museum system, affects not only the physical realm of the collectible works, but also the visual space. Outside this museum, however, the work can be realized and run on many devices, interfaces in many circumstances. It is not, as I demonstrated, media-specific. Its archive contains a universe of past realizations and anticipates these realizations yet to come. So, just as a sort of kind of really quick wrap-up, this works here evidence, I believe, how the analog medium of flux film, its inherent instability and material in visual contents, is in the process of continuous reinterpretation, prescription, and remediation, and how this work moves between formats and platforms, seemingly unconcerned with the gravity of its physical careers. Some of those prescriptions, I think, transgress the limits of acceptable change and form new autonomous entities which memorize the work that gave rise to them. Other exist within the universe of Zen for Film, condemned to perpetuate it within a more kind of acceptable regime of cultural memory, which finds evidence in direct material relations. In such understanding, Zen for Internet and structural film are actualizations, perhaps, of Zen for Film, rather than its conservations. They allow us to think about the past not as a remote thing lying distance of chronological scale, separated from us and foreign, so tempting to return to, so in need of restoration. Rather, the past is here, present and durational. It is, in the words of David Lowenthal again, I quote, resurrected into an ever-changing present. So ultimately, I believe that conservation perhaps must look beyond the purely material and affirm the continuity of this type of works through change. Putting Pike's statement about the lack of gravity of the future works in a different words, and you remember this quotation from the kind of mid-term of my talk. I am quoting Lowenthal again. Is an illusion. What matters in preservation may be the continuity of form, of substance, of texture, of color. End of quote. While physical preservation, which attempts to render objects stable and the rest change, is limited by the physical life of matter, even in long duration, as you remember from what I was arguing, or as material formations, everything will come to an end that extends human lifespan and upsets our conception of eternal art. The work, which is perpetuated by means of multiple instantiations, like perhaps those which I've shown you, reenactments and re-performances, have, I believe, more chance for survival. This, of course, within the range of acceptable change, which, of course, depends on cultural commissions and the archive, but this would be the topic of another, I think, long lecture And just before thanking you for your attention, Pablo already mentioned, I'm really, really pleased to be involved in the book, in the edited book, which I just screenshotted here. The cover page, sorry, egoistically, just of my article, but the entire book is just amazing. I wish I could read everything one to one. If you are more interested in this type of thinking, my newest book here, Pike's Virtual Archive, the monograph, appeared just 2 years ago, and this is this sort of kind of contemplation on the materiality of Flux film #1 here, which I mentioned before. And I allowed myself also to include an edited volume, which is just now in print from Brill, and it's titled The Explicit Material, which will be also available as an ebook, and which I co-edited together with my wonderful colleagues, Francesca Bauer of Harvard and Katarina Amann of the Swiss Institute for Art Research. And it's all about material transitions, not only actually also in digital objects, but also in films, performances, archaeological objects, and all this we are trying to put forward a more kind of focused thinking about material transitions and material lives of artworks. So yes, thank you so much for your attention, and that's it.
Alô? Isso. Bom dia novamente. Vocês conseguiram. Primeiramente, obrigado pela palestra, né, professora Hanna Hölling. Acredito que vocês puderam ver, principalmente quem conhece a gente, né, do grupo de pesquisa e conhece nossas pesquisas, as relações que existem entre as pesquisas e os conceitos, principalmente a forma em que ela desenvolve os conceitos e os nossos trabalhos, né? Então, há uma aproximação teórica já com o grupo de pesquisa e também, principalmente com o GT4, né, de Memórias e Tecnologias Digitais, deste seminário, deste congresso. Então, a gente consegue começar a fazer esse desenho a partir da fala da professora, especialmente quando a gente trabalha e pensa as ideias que ela apresenta sobre a mutabilidade, né, que a gente traduziu nesse nome, durabilidade, e essa dimensão, né, que a durabilidade e a mutabilidade em relação revela a materialidade da obra, no caso nosso, as obras digitais, né, ou relacionadas com a tecnologia digital. Bom, então, eu conheci o trabalho da professora Hanna foi justamente pelas nossas discussões do grupo a respeito de estabilidade da obra de arte digital e os modos de preservação da arte, a obra produzida em relação da arte, ciência e tecnologia, ou as artes, ciências e tecnologia. Enfim, então, a gente tem esse diálogo já prévio com o trabalho da professora, essa recepção prévia. Então, para a gente é um prazer estar com ela aqui hoje, presente. Nós agradecemos muito a fala dela. Ela contribuiu com o nosso livro, que vai ser lançado amanhã, como ela falou. Né? Essa palestra dialoga bastante com o capítulo dela, então reforça essa discussão. E a partir de agora, para não ficar falando muito, vou abrir para perguntas. Tem microfone circulando com o Marlon. Quem quer fazer primeiro? O Paulo já quer fazer. Deixa eu passar para ele aqui, você fica mais livre.
Doutora Hanna, eu fiquei pensando aqui, quando você colocou os conceitos de utilidade e de duração, né, de durabilidade da obra, como você relaciona isso no contexto atual com a questão dos videogames? Porque quando a gente fala de jogos digitais, né, principalmente no contexto de arte, assim, a gente tem muito essa questão da mutabilidade e tem muito essa questão da durabilidade da obra, né, que é aquilo que constitui. Como você faz essa relação?
Thank you for your super interesting question. Well, I think that, you know, the changeability might be related to video games on many different levels. There is always the physical career, right? If we just think, you know, come back to this idea of vehicular and perhaps artistic medium, if a video game, say, can be conceived in terms of what it does rather than how it is transported, no? Then the sort of kind of physical career of video game always undergoes, I think, transitions, changes, and all sorts of transmutation because of media obsolescence and basically, you know, sometimes unavailability of certain, you know, kind of structures or also programs, you know, applications and all sorts of things. I think also, you know, with interactivity, you have the changeability lying on the table very clearly because, you know, the work is inherently changeable by the way how new content is being injected and how it develops through different kind of users. You know yourself how differently this can be done, and depends very much on the nature of a video game, I think. I'm really interested, so in my scholarly work, actually, I'm hugely interested in precisely in this, you know, how this, say, cultural artifacts, even if they are not artworks, because I'm also thinking about, you know, kind of material culture, fluxus of different sorts of things, and how these cultural artifacts actually, you know, are referred to as singular, say, entities, and yet they evolve and mutate so much that sometimes, you know, the end product is something very different, working on different platforms, sometimes rewritten, sometimes virtualized, kind of, you know, enclosed in new environments and so on. So this is what interests me actually greatly, and this can be referred to as, yeah, as changeability. Perhaps you could think this further. Yeah.
Doutora Hanna, bom dia. Muito obrigada pela palestra, muito interessante. Eu gostaria de perguntar, uma pergunta que fica no ar, né? Qual é o futuro da arte em mídia mesmo? As questões culturais, econômicas e políticas, por exemplo, aqui no Brasil também me interessam, né, analisar principalmente na questão desse momento de transição do arquivo, sobre a questão da materialidade, né? Nós temos um caso muito interessante de um filme produzido por um cineasta brasileiro, mineiro, chamado de Almeida, que ele teve um filme censurado, que foi desaparecido durante mais de 3 décadas, chamado Mangue Bang. E esse filme foi encontrado pelo pessoal do MoMA de Nova York e foi restaurado em 2010. E ele ficou muito feliz com essa notícia, porque para ele tinha achado que o filme tinha se perdido. E o que acontece? Apenas os norte-americanos que tiveram e têm acesso a esse filme. Ele nunca, né, então, porque ele falava muito, fazia uma crítica política muito ferrenha. Então, a questão da preservação que você coloca, né, que as coisas não foram feitas para durar para sempre e tudo, coloca em xeque muitas vezes aspectos ligados à nossa cultura e que precisa muitas vezes de investimentos para poder digitalizar esses acervos cinematográficos e tudo mais, que fazem parte, né, da memória. Bom, mas esse é outro assunto. Eu gostaria que você escolhesse um pouco essa questão dessa transição e o futuro, né, dessa arte mesmo em mídia, performática que você apresentou do Fluxus, da Nanjo Park, que você estuda, né, que é a progenitora da videoarte. A gente vai ter uma exposição hoje, né, também, a Panorama, às 18 horas, que vai mostrar vários trabalhos, né, que a Rubeira selecionou e fazem parte, e que dialoga muito com o que você mostrou aqui para nós, que mistura o analógico, o digital.
Thank you so much for this question. There are so many aspects. Thank you so much. There are so many aspects that you raised, and I think, you know, they just deserve quite a lot of elaboration, which I will probably not be able to do this within this very quick answer, but I do think, just starting from the very end, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing, the exhibition that will raise many, perhaps, of the issues or relate to the issues that I try to address. The future of media art. I mean, this is a topic that many books have been written on. I think that generally, I might try to answer actually this question this way, that in conservation and kind of Western museological discourses, we quite often believe that the stabilization of a work is its reduction to, again, to kind of object, to one singular object, or to some kind of, self-contained physical entity. The way how conservation functioned, I think, and how it was theorized as well, always also relates to some, to a work of art which, although recently, more and more acknowledgement has been found for iterant works, or works of art which appear in multiple reinstantiations or manifestations. I still believe that, in all the texts, all this kind of theorization of contemporary art in the context of conservation, we still have this tendency to reduce work of art to a physical sort of kind of manifestation. Even if now there are several of them, we still refer to original condition, authentic work, and so on. So there's this idea of a higher valuation of something that appeared in the past in relation to something that changed in transition. This is what I was referring to when I said that change is considered as a negative factor in conservation and museological discourses. But what I'm trying to say is that I believe that the future, of those type of media or of those cultural artifacts as well, lies really in the acknowledgement, in true acknowledgement of their changeable nature, right? And you might also say, well, everything changes, so how can we keep and how can we control, what is still the work and how can we let it go? And I think there are many different ways of doing this. One of the ways, is to write documentation about the work which fluctuates between different states and conditions and so on. Perhaps a report, of the state of participation, of a video game, or of an interactive work, and so on. This is one of the ways. I think the others is just, perhaps allowing, people to have direct experience of the work by exhibiting it and making it accessible. And even if I am very critical of, and perhaps, some of you will be, because I experienced this also in the past, of the digital version of Zen for film, because, it is, in a way, this kind of frozen moment, and it transforms Zen for film into this kind of digital artifact. In German, we have a very nice word for this. It's called digitalisat, and I didn't find a translation of this word, in English. So it's a digital artifact, digitalisat. Even though one could criticize this, the availability of the concept through this digitalisat, through this digital version that is uploaded on YouTube, the access people gain nonetheless, not to the full materiality of the work as it once was. It does something, it is very, I think, important, and it should not be kind of regarded in negative terms. When I teach, this type of media, I always say to the students, of course, I play it, but just I played it back here to you because I don't have a projector, and could not take all this stuff with me. But when I show it to my students, I always tell them, well, this is a part, perhaps, of, or a presentation of the work, not a part of this, but a presentation of the work, which allows you an access, but you have to go and see it and experience it with its sound, the clattering projector, and so on. So yes, so just a very long answer to your very interesting question, or aspect of the question. That I think accessibility is very important, and we have to basically experience these works. We have to remember them. The aspect of memory, which underpins the topic of the seminar as well, is very important. Memory for me, you know, it belongs to the archive, to the virtual sphere of the archive, now as a concept, not as only the kind of physicality of the traces and documentations. Knowing about those works, you know, the tacit and explicit knowledge, this is, I think, the future also of media art, basically. Yeah. And I could talk quite a lot about all the other issues, and I would be very curious about the Manji work, right, at MoMA. Perhaps we could exchange afterwards. Yeah.
Esse trabalho do MoMA, ele foi considerado perdido, né, durante mais de 30 anos, porque ele foi censurado em 1973, né? Eu falo isso porque eu entrevistei o Nevi, e ele é um cineasta, considerado assim, um cineasta maldito, porque ele fazia filmes muito polêmicos na década de 70, tem a Gama da Lotação e outros filmes, né, que falavam muito sobre moral, política. Ele foi perseguido pela ditadura, então assim, ele perdeu uma parte do acervo dele. Esse foi um dos filmes que ele editou, ele morou em Nova York, ele editou, mas ele teve o filme recolhido, mesmo lá fora, e foi dado como perdido, ele nem esperava encontrar. Então, na década de 2000, esse filme foi encontrado, foi restaurado, né, mas ele está lá, no MoMA, ele não veio para o Brasil. Quer dizer, ele foi exibido pelos americanos, né? Por causa dessa crítica ferrenha que ele fazia, sabe? O sistema capitalista e tudo mais. Então, no Brasil, nós temos esse, digamos, esse problema, né? Com questões de arquivo, de obras de arte, de cineastas, escritores. E vivemos isso no passado e estamos a ver de viver isso novamente. Então, acho que a questão da memória, da preservação, nós tivemos o Museu Nacional, que sofreu um incêndio, até hoje está para ser reconstruído, né? Já passaram alguns anos. Então, a gente tem esse problema com arquivo, memória, com investimentos para cultura. Né? Então, isso, de alguma forma, afeta também o desenvolvimento das artes digitais.
Oi, Hanna. Adorei a palestra, quero agradecer. Adorei a parte do Zen com a internet, que eu não conhecia. E queria perguntar para você o que você acha de que aconteceu aqui, de você não ter acesso à internet, isso ter gerado uma nova forma de exposição desse trabalho. Se você acha que isso é um potencial de mutabilidade, de repetibilidade dessa obra. E aproveitando também a pergunta dela, e a última, sobre a questão de... Ano passado nós tivemos o Museu Nacional do Rio pegando fogo e recentemente a gente teve a Catedral do Amsterdã também sofrendo com incêndio, tendo isso, mudando sua memória. Como que isso afeta a nossa ideia de conservação de memória e se você pensa isso como uma ideia de mutabilidade das obras de conservação de memória, a possibilidade de pegar fogo nos museus, etc.
Thank you for your question. If I understand it rightly, you asked me whether a destruction of the archive might instigate a sort of changeability of the work, so that if the material is lost, can we reimagine it? Is that correct? Yes, super. So this is a super exciting question, and actually, you know, I have been thinking quite a lot about this because one can answer it from sides. The one would be to think about the possibility, you know, the memory gives us in different types of actualization or, presencing the media outside of their material realm. Well, this is, in a way, kind of perhaps thinking about the idea of variable media project that, you know, kind of for the very first time in the year 2000 or so, they published the Guggenheim, this one I mentioned. When they published, they basically proposed that works of art could exist, you know, outside the kind of realm of their physical career. You know? They didn't theorize that further. But I think the idea itself is quite interesting. Now, the question that is even more interesting would be, what allows us to think about a work which can be continued in such a way that, what kind of culture must be given, or what kind of precondition that the work that we reinstantiate out of memory, recollection, what have you, is still the same work, no? And here comes, again, this kind of traditional paradigm of conservation, which usually does not allow this, no? Say, a Mona Lisa would be lost, or someone would just take, or let's say, burn it down, which would be, a terrible loss, of course, and we experience it all the time with this, terrible loss of the entire collection in the Rio Museum, which we all observe with such dread and sadness. But when you think about how traditional artwork actually cannot be reinstantiated according to these cultures of conservation and museological kind of thinking, as a replica, right? So you say, I'm doing here quite a lot of quite a big loop, because say a performance art or a piece like many of those examples that I presented, like Zen for film that is based on instruction or this particular projection, it rests within, a sort of kind of documentary record and an instruction. No? A traditional work of art does not do this. But it would be very interesting to think further the cultures of conservation and of curation, all the kind of musicological discourses, to allow actually these works to be reinstantiated in this way, no? I mean, there are also, for instance, projects such as, you might have come across Factum Data. There is this very interesting, atelier or studio in Madrid, which is run by Hanna Hölling. And they, basically together with Bruno Latour, a few years ago, they published also a book, which is titled Coping with the Past. They basically copied one-to-one digitally, they transferred, a work of art, which is a traditional work of art, the big Veronese, which hangs opposite to Mona Lisa in Louvre. They scanned it, and transformed it one-to-one to, another career, and brought it back to the country of its origin, which is Italy, no, right? Venice, San Giorgio Maggiore, and hanged it back in an environment which was designed by Palladio, which kind of was concluded by this huge painting. So the idea there was that one can actually, divorce a work of art, a traditional work of art, or from its kind of material significance, reinstantiate it and bring it back to this kind of context of its origins. And I think that, it goes a little bit away from this notion of memory and so on, but it has something to do with the idea of skill, transmission of skill or technique and so on. And I believe that, that basically this is quite underappreciated aspect in our thinking about continuity of works of art which might be actually conveyed in instruction, documentation, and so on. And what allows us to think about traditional works now differently is our engagement with this new media, because the new media are, conveyed in instructions, documentations, course, and what have you. And I'm thinking here also, new media in terms of performance and objects, something that is less oriented towards one singular manifestation. Yeah. Does answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bom, acho que já é boa tarde, né? Então, nós temos uma experiência, assim, uma história de perda, né, do patrimônio cultural, mas também temos, assim, inovações, né? A gente teve a história do Museu de Língua Portuguesa, que pegou fogo em São Paulo, mas o acervo todo do museu era digital. Então, eles só restauraram o prédio, né? Eu acho que já foi até inaugurado. Temos também um Museu do Amanhã, no Rio de Janeiro, que é um museu de ciência e tecnologia, e o acervo dele também é digital, né? Mas nada supre a perda do objeto único, como você falou, né? E aí eu fico pensando no Walter Benjamin, que ele fala na descrição da aura, né, do objeto único, onde que se perde a experiência do vivido, né? E também fico pensando no conceito de ruína também, né? Como lidar com isso daqui para frente. Eu acho que a arte digital e a interatividade, ela sofre muito essas questões. Mas fica esse sentimento de perda, né? Perda e a cultura mesmo, como o Walter mesmo coloca, como um instrumento de barbárie, né?
But it's fascinating. Thank you so much for this very insightful and thoughtful comment. And something that reminds me also of the former question, because the question was about the destruction, how works of art basically are destroyed, and how can they be continued. I think that the digital actually teaches us that this is possible outside of this material domain, which dominated, again, this kind of Western museum cultures and conservation. I think this might sound really inappropriate to say, because we are evoking here tragic loss of precious objects, in collections and so on. But there is this idea that the archive, or the sort of kind of human urge to collect is kind of indefinite, but we also cannot collect everything, and actually the gap in collection, or sometimes the loss. And again, I'm totally aware of the inappropriateness in a way of this context in which I'm evoking this. But I think Nietzsche says that we have to forget in order to remember, right? Because we cannot, in a way, kind of accumulate everything and keep everything. In this book, which I've shown you recently, the one that will be now out, that I co-edited with my colleagues, there is an interview with Jorge Otero Pylos. He's a very interesting person and scholar at the Columbia. He runs, I think, the architectural conservation department there. But don't take 100% the name of this organization now, because I don't remember it exactly. But he is speaking in this interview, which I had the pleasure to do with him, about transitional objects. The idea, what interests me greatly, about why human beings actually have this urge to, connect with material things. Why do they preserve and so on? And there is this idea that he takes on that comes from Winnicott. It's a child psychologist that basically put forward this idea of transitional objects. A child which is kind of divorced from this sort of kind of first encounter with his or her or its man. He searches for the connection with the world. So the first kind of object he grabs is an old teddy, or a teddy which becomes then all stained and smelly, or a blanket, and so on. This is between the kid, its tiny world, first oriented only towards the mother and then towards the external world, the first kind of connection he makes. Now, Otero Pylos thinks about the transitional objects in terms of monuments. So all these objects that are out there that we are trying to preserve, to stick to, materially and physically, are this kind of transitional objects for us adults. And David Lowenthal, the cultural geographer that I quote quite a lot, it was my huge kind of inspiration. He just passed this last October. He speaks, about the issue of or of human art to preserve works as something that, in a way, immortalizes us, right? So it is very risky, and I'm making here again this connection with memory or with works of art which are not necessarily, materially based. It's very risky to say from now on, let's think about instructions or just memory or written narratives or, just kind of accounts as a possibility of preservation, which will never happen as a sole method. But I do believe that this kind of regime, of the virtual archive remains very underappreciated. And it is a mode which allows many works to exist already. Research projects have been done already on accounts or memories about digital works. There are also memories, of the survivors of the Holocaust and so on, and an entire scholarship which is being done in this direction, which is, I think, quite worth looking into as well. So,
Thank you, Hanna. Silvana está na fila primeiro.
Olá, Hanna. Meu nome é Silvana e durante muito tempo eu trabalhei dentro de hospícios, ou manicômios. E uma coisa que me chamava muita atenção era a ausência de imagens. No hospício você não pode ter nem espelho, é uma coisa muito massacrante. Eles não têm contato com o próprio corpo, nem com a própria imagem, de maneira nenhuma. E eu tive a ideia de colocar um cinema dentro do hospício. E fiz isso no hospício que eu trabalhava, que chamava Serra Verde, que tinha 480 crônicos, que eram pessoas que estavam internadas lá há mais de 20 anos. Normalmente pessoas abandonadas por família e etc. Antes disso, eu já tinha levado uma eletrola, com LPs, e tinha constatado a emoção que eles tinham de pegar a agulha e colocar aquela coisa para tocar. Quando eu coloquei o projetor lá, eu fiz um convênio com a minha escola de Belas Artes e levei praticamente um cinematógrafo de Lumière, que era um aparelho muito antigo, filmes em ECRA, e como uma pesquisa anterior com os pacientes, 95% queria filme pornô e 5% filme de Power Rangers, eu optei por levar, por exemplo, Charlie Chaplin e tal, para uma coisa mais ou menos equilibrada ali. Mas o que me chamou muita atenção foi que a maioria dos pacientes na sala de cinema olhava para o aparelho, ao invés de olhar para a tela. A tela, na verdade, foi um lençol branco que eu estiquei lá na frente e tal. E aquilo me encheu de curiosidade, etc. Eu ficava pensando naquela relação orgânica, que a gente sempre que fala de memória, a gente lembra de museus, de grandes obras de artes, e existe essa memória, que eu chamo de memória ribeirinha, que é uma memória, sabe, de colocar um disco, de se ver no espelho, de ouvir aquele barulho, aquela coisa do cinematógrafo. Agora, eu fico pensando se, futuramente, por exemplo, essas gerações, elas não vão conviver com essa coisa a arte digital, para mim, ela é silenciosa. Ela não tem essa coisificação da analógica. Mas se isso não vai ser a memória, se a memória não vai ser esse silêncio, essa ausência, esse vazio, essa coisificação que, particularmente, a mim me emociona muito. Então, quando eu vejo, por exemplo, desse assassinato que teve da Vale, do Rio Doce, que enterrou o Rio, e você vê pessoas na televisão falando assim, eu perdi todas as minhas fitas de VHS com as memórias do meu casamento, que foi nos anos 70, quando se usava VHS. Eu acho que isso é de uma crucial importância. Mas acho que, de alguma forma, essa é a minha pergunta também, se isso vai ser uma memória tão distante para as próximas gerações, que eles vão ficar mais condenados ao silêncio da digitalização.
Thank you so much. That's an amazing question. Yeah, I mean, there are so many aspects that one could address. It's just you raised so many issues. I mean, to start very kind of straightforwardly, I would love to kind of address perhaps the haptic and the tangible of the digital as well. I worked for a while, for a considerable while actually, in the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe in Germany. You might have heard this is a kind of huge institution for digital art, computer-based media, and so on, contemporary art in southern Germany. And basically, I never actually came to kind of think about those issues or write about those issues more elaborately, but it would make a wonderful kind of piece, thinking how the digital collections actually present us with the sort of kind of multi-sensorial experiences. You evoked, the sense of hearing, everything's sonic in a work of art or in a cultural artifacts and so on. But there are also haptic dimensions of digital media, of interactivity. My kind of argument, I think, that I'm trying to put forward always is that the digital is never materialized. It has always a screen, as some kind of interface, something that we hold on to, even a keyboard or a joystick and what have you. And this, in a way, evoked a very different kind of experience and will remain in memory in a particular way. We even speak about a mouse hand. If you hold the mouse all the time and work with the computer. So this is like a very kind of embodied knowledge and a certain kind of memory that absolutely those generations that are born digital, say, will have, I think, But generally, I also, one more thing in relation to my work at ZKM, what I noticed there is that, there is this challenge between, because ZKM had a collection of contemporary artworks which were quite traditional in terms of, they have paintings and more kind of sculptural objects, and then, next to it, the collections of interactive art, computer-based works, and so on. So the idea that you present them in very different ways put forward the very kind of multi-sensorial aspect, actually, of this digital work, say, For instance, you have to, you quite often stick a label to the floor, do not touch in front of a painting or a sculpture, or a sculpture stands in the middle of the room and it's kind of separated with a barrier. But with digital works or with the interactive works, you have to, produce very different labels. Actually, please touch, or do something, or please sit in the work, or enter the work. Look at 360 degree screen, or move different icons around, because otherwise people accustomed to usual collections, the traditional collections, would not do it. So I do believe, that those experiences are very special. They are very kind of haptic and evoke different kind of sensorial, they evoke different kind of sensorial. I experienced an exhibition at the Tongli Museum in Basel just, I think, a year ago, which perhaps I would like to hear more about the project that you were just presenting. But the touche, and this means, I think, the sense of touch, and it was addressing basically works of art that were either addressing the sense of touch or were just put there for us to experience manually, by touching, basically, and kind of direct corporeal engagement. It was really interesting because, first of all, this exhibition challenged And I bet there were many others like this, but it was my kind of very profound experience, I think, for the very first time. This challenge, this centrism of visuality, that I think governs our culture generally. Everything is very visual. We have to, look at things. There is aesthetic appreciation of works of art that we analyze visually. And works of art or cultural objects do more than this. They smell, sometimes they disintegrate like Diderot's, mold pieces or mold museum in Hamburg. They can be touched and they are experienced in so many multisensorial ways. And this exhibition was, among other, featured a work which, if I'm not mistaken, it was an ensemble created by one particular artist of the name I can't remember right now. But it featured several classical sculptures that were to be experienced only by touch. So we got the little, blind, or our eyes were basically blinded, and we had a little audio guide, on our ears, and 15 minutes to just touch the works. And I must say that for the very first time, actually, I had this opportunity to really close my eyes and not use my sense of sight. And the worlds one kind of, discovers only by touching. When I was looking at the people touching the sculptures, I thought, what they're doing is so long there. But then, you start to sense, when you do it yourself, you start to sense the texture, this kind of, trace of the tool, the warmth of the material, and so on. And I think that, this kind of taking us away from the centrism of visuality opens up a huge amount of possibilities, not only for understanding or appreciation of traditional lives, but also, in digital media. And quite often, this digital media actually enable us to do this. My example wasn't speaking to digital media, but I hope you could get the kind of sense of what I was trying to say. Okay.
We have time for one last question. Okay, Hanna? Vamos lá.
Oi, bom dia, Hanna, obrigada pela sua palestra. Me fez pensar, em tudo que você falou, me fez refletir sobre o meu trabalho, Eu trabalho no Arquivo Nacional, atualmente no setor de filmes. E lá a gente tem películas, do próprio Neville, que a colega ele falou, películas de instituições públicas, de informação, a Agência Nacional, a TVE, a TV Educativa, a TV Tupi também tem um acervo lá. Só que lá a gente vive a seguinte situação, películas que contam a nossa história, mas nós não temos como projetá-las, nós não temos aparelhos para projetar, o acesso é quadro a quadro, sem som, e ao mesmo tempo não temos uma verba para digitalização. A gente, na verdade, na instituição, no arquivo, estamos em contato com essa política de conservação mais tradicional que você falou. Mas, por falta de investimento, muitas películas estão se perdendo. Então, eu entendo quando você diz que é necessário esquecer para lembrar, que não temos como colecionar tudo, mas o quanto de conhecimento que está se perdendo, de memória que está se perdendo, a gente deixa de dar acesso por uma falta de política pública, por falta de investimento. Então, a sua palestra me tocou nesse sentido, assim, de o que está se perdendo e, claro, que nem tudo vai ser colecionado, nem tudo vai ser lembrado. Mas poderíamos fazer mais, pela preservação dessa memória? Obrigada.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hope yes, thank you so much. I mean, it's such an important aspect. Can we just lose knowledge? Absolutely no, right? Because everything, I mean, the collections, national collections are so important. And again, I was saying, this, yes, I was saying this in a very specific context. So I was just saying, that we have to also think about the other side of the story, that, we have to make place for new, and not everything is conservable. But obviously, I have been I came to history of art through conservation. So I was a practicing conservator for a while before taking my PhD. And absolutely, I mean, this is like, you would not be able to say this or to represent this view as a conservator. The traditional conservation theory tells something about, the imperative to conserve everything. Cesare Brandi, 1960s, everything that is recognized, I mean, in his aesthetic terms, as a work of art. But now, we are extending this to cultural artifacts in general. So yeah, we have to basically, try to find strategies and try to kind of operate within this difficult economy to find means to preserve, archives like this, which are invaluable. I think that's one of the issues that I think your question raised, if I understood it correctly, was the idea of having the films on the one hand and, perhaps not having the technical apparatuses, right, to play them back on the other. And this, I must tell you, is a huge problem in many institutions with which I was, collaborating or working as a researcher later on, but also at which I worked in my earlier stage of my kind of professional trajectory. The one thing is to collect, and the other is to be able to play it back, right? This is why, many of the media collections actually in Europe introduced, the preservation or conservation kind of policies to media quite late on. So if I may come back now again to ZKM, the first director of ZKM, Heinrich Cox, already somewhere in the early 1990s when the collections were being established, he thought already about collecting and conserving works of art. And I was the fourth conservator, to work as a conservator in this museum, which is quite interesting because, there are thousands of works of digital art, computer-based arts, and so on, and they were not actually well taken care of. And this is not because one doesn't want, but because, there were just only certain kind of financial means and economic possibilities to do this. Many also museums in Europe fight with this. We are talking, I was evoking here MoMA, or perhaps Tate came through in one of those slides. These are large institutions, and they are doing a great job in kind of proposing different sorts of projects, producing scholarship and knowledge. But there are, hundreds and hundreds, also smaller museums which fight, on everyday basis with economic means, not having enough resources to do this. At a certain moment, I think in Europe, we were thinking about establishing a sort of kind of apparatus or media database for, media collections, for instance, collections of video art and film and others, to basically have some kind of, apparatus basis, basically, for collections which cannot afford to have all those devices with them. Because, if you acquire a device, you have to also hire a technician who is able to maintain it, right? And to have this knowledge, in a way, to run it, right? The acquisition of the device is not the end of the story. And this perpetuates itself. One time, you have a new medium or a computer-based piece, you need, an apparatus to play it back, or the entire infrastructure, the knowledge, the technician, and so on. And yeah, I mean, these are obviously very difficult media to collect, but the more perhaps it is important to speak about them and to kind of do things with them, to make them accessible, yeah.
Eu só quero agradecer pela brilhante participação no nosso evento, agradeço muito a sua presença, apesar de a gente ter tido alguns percalços, durante o processo da vinda, a preparação da vinda, enfim, deu tudo certo, afinal, agradeço muito, você viu que o público está bastante interessado nas discussões, isso para mim é maravilhoso também, porque a gente que trabalha com arquivo, às vezes arquivo com memória, trabalha muito sozinho, Então, às vezes, a gente acaba não tendo os pares para conversar, e essa oportunidade aqui é muito boa. para isso. Então, eu só quero agradecer ao público presente, à professora, mais uma vez, né? E, enfim, declaro encerrado essa sessão, né? E desejo bons trabalhos hoje à tarde. Muito obrigado, uma salva de palmas para as pessoas, mais uma vez. Só um lembrete, hoje a gente começa às 2h30, que é o primeiro dia, para a gente se organizar. A partir de amanhã, 2 horas, tá? Os GTs. Então é só para ficarem atentos a essa programação. Acredito que a gente vai ter um encerramentozinho aqui agora.
Agora o nosso evento fará uma pausa para o almoço. A organização informa que o Seminário de Artes Digitais optou por não realizar parceria com restaurantes da região, mas informa que a equipe do evento, vestidos com a camisa do evento, essa camisa que eu estou, tá, gente? Conhece alguns restaurantes da região, então vocês podem perguntar para os estagiários, se quem tiver em dúvida, que eles vão saber informar para vocês. Voltaremos às 14h30 com os grupos de trabalho, os 4 grupos de trabalho. Grupo de trabalho 1, Universo Lúdico, coordenado pela professora Binha Alves e pelo professor Paulo Lovira. Vai ser no Rainha da Sucata. GT2, Design, Arte e Interface, coordenado pela professora Cássia e pelo professor Maurício. Vai ser realizado no Museu das Minas de Metal. Grupo de trabalho 3, Imagem e Tecnopoéticas, coordenado pelos professores Rogério Barbosa e Wagner Moreira, do Cefet. E vai ser realizado aqui no BDMG, neste auditório. E o GT4, Memória e Tecnologias Digitais, coordenado pelas professoras Kátia Barbosa e Renata Baracho, e será no BDMG também, mas no outro auditório. Eles vão informar para vocês onde que é. Lembramos que no GT1, hoje, no Universo Lúdico, teremos a conferência de abertura com o professor doutor Eucídio Pimenta Arruda, da UFMG. Damos destaque a essa conferência de abertura dos trabalhos para todos que quiserem ir conhecer a pesquisa do professor sobre jogos. Ainda lembramos que hoje, às 18 horas, temos a abertura da exposição Panorama no Centro Cultural da Escola de Design, da UEM, na Rua Gonçalves Dias, 1434. Para quem não conhece, gente, o Centro Cultural da Faculdade de Design fica aqui na Praça da Liberdade, na esquina da Praça da Liberdade, ele é bem fácil de chegar. Na ocasião, teremos a performance Epilepsia, Micropausa Blues, do JP Caron e Henrique Wall. Desejamos a todas e todos um bom almoço e que tenham uma tarde produtiva.